Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for inviting me to the STM conference, and we're particularly talking about this session whereby we are making global local, and my contextualization to this panel will be focusing on how we can contextualize the research capacity and redefine it when we're looking at global local. My name is Joy Owango. I'm the Executive Director of the Clinical Communication, which is based in the University of Nairobi in Kenya. And what we do is support researchers in improving their output and improving their ability to scholarly and science communication. One of the things I need to take you through is, if you're going to talk about how we can make global local, is by understanding the current trends in higher education in Africa. In 2007, the STISA report of the African Union mandated that African countries must spend at least 1% of their GDP in higher education and research. And out of this, 16 countries have actually committed to this. And those are the ones highlighted in the image. And these countries have committed or are already spending at least 1% of their GDP in STNI and higher education. And what that means is that there's a strong demand for collaboration. There's a strong demand for investment in higher education and STNI in Africa. Another trend also in Africa is that African research output in the last 10 years has steadily increased, and we are looking at over 1.6 million records have been produced in the last 10 years. And when I look at 10 years, we're looking at all 54 African countries. That includes the Ocean Island countries. And out of this, 40.6 of this output is open access. So the rise of open science and open access has actually been very helpful to African research, because African research is increasing in visibility. And the 40.6 is, we're looking at about 680,000 publications. So how do you contextualize research capacity, and how do you redefine it, especially when you're looking at a global to local level? Number one, we look at various aspects in terms of how we can, especially with our partnerships on education, and how our partnerships can provide education, facilitation, and partnerships in the research life cycle of the higher education sector, which covers the research councils, the granting councils, the university commissions, and the libraries. And I say this is possible because we are already doing this with some of our strategic partners, in which we are providing redefined, contextualized capacity building with the objective of educating, facilitating within the context of the partnerships in the continent. And the reason why we are saying this is that we definitely need to rethink what capacity building is and strategic partnership is, especially from a global North-South context. And it has to, because traditionally, the higher education sector has always fallen under the development sector. It has always been perceived as the researchers in the global South, or even countries in the global South, were always perceived as recipients of this support. But there was very little support. There was very little involvement on how we could work together to benefit the African continent and also African researchers. So because of this development, as I call it, the development theory, whereby we were just working with the agenda of the funder, who is predominantly in the global North, we ended up seeing a lot of continuous colonization of higher education and academic publishing. We ended up producing research which would benefit the funder, but rarely would it benefit African researchers. Now, because of the fact that there's been a lot of nationalization in the continent, and there's an increased awareness on decolonization in the higher education sector and the investment of African governments in higher education and research, what we are looking at is a redefined aspect of strategic partnerships, whereby we are able to work together in order to support the higher education sector and the research sector in the continent. And these are some of the partners and the activities we've been doing when I say that we have been redefining and rethinking what capacity building is, what is involved in capacity building through strategic partnership. So the first aspect is decolonizing the academic publishing
decolonizing academic publishing. So when you're looking at the academic publishing life cycle, we are looking at also a continent that is young. When I say young, the average age of somebody in this continent is in their 30s. So we are relatively young continent, and that means younger early career researchers. And because of that, we've been training them on how to decolonize the academic publishing processes by understanding the biases in peer review, by creating sustainable approaches to the academic publishing life cycle, by training these early career researchers on how to be editors. Okay, so that's what we're doing, and we've been, especially when it comes to on how to be editors, we're working with some of the publishers to train these early career researchers. When it comes to the understanding the bias when it comes to peer review, we've been doing this with pre-review and eLife, and most importantly, when we are working on the decolonization of academic publishing through the increase of African research output, we've been working very closely with Africa Archive. It's a continental preprint repository whereby African researchers can put their research output, and any researcher who is out of Africa can put in their research output and also increase the visibility of the output that is coming out of the continent. When it comes to research excellence and looking at higher education leadership excellence, we've been working closely with Knowledge Unlatched and Digital Science in providing open science solutions that can support higher education and research institutions in having access to good quality open access solutions for research discovery, which is extremely important. But it goes beyond just providing open access solutions for research discovery, but also working with these higher education stakeholders in making sure that African content is indexed in these platforms, because that is also another thing we noted. We were recipients of data, but we are not seeing African data represented in some of these platforms. So we've had such amazing relationships with these two organizations in making sure that African content, African research output is indexed in these platforms, and thus increasing the visibility of the outputs coming out of the continent. And please note, when we are working with some of these, our Global North partners, we also work with Global South partners within the continent. So basically, African institutions and higher stakeholders in making sure that we have the correct content that is indexed within the platform. So when it comes to higher education excellence and strengthening knowledge economies, we've been doing this through the creation of awareness on open science. And we've been working closely with PLOS and also our partners in the region, that is the Association of African Universities, the East African Science and Technology Commission, whereby we are emphasizing, we are guiding and supporting government institutions on what they need to do in order to have open science mandates, whether it is open policy mandates within their institute or, most importantly, within the region. And this is mostly done in partnership with the local partners on the ground. And as I say, all this is about redefining and rethinking capacity building, because every time we are looking at partners who want to work in our continent, and when I say our continent, that is my continent in Africa, my first question is, what is your interest and what is your long-term strategy for this continent? We want people who we can work with together in building the higher education sector, who acknowledge that there are different ways and systems that work within the continent, but are committed to supporting the higher education sector in Africa. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you so much for having made time to listen to me.